What is going on, guys? This is Sean from the progressive metal band Devoted Fusion, and my name is also Green Day Cusack on YouTube. I am here today to tell you exactly how I mixed our newest album, Ship Me to Heaven. So before I jump right into this, I want to give a very small disclaimer to everyone that is watching. A couple of things to know. The first thing is that I do not have the ability to record the audio in Studio One, so I'm doing whatever I can to just give you a representation of the raw version versus the mixed version that I did to a specific section of one of our songs here. And the other disclaimer I would like to make for anyone that does mixing as well, or is an audio engineer, my way that I mix this album, it may be different than how other audio engineers have done it, so please do not solely go by my word on every single thing. If you are looking for your own mix, that is for you and your band and your audio engineers to work with, okay? So, let's get started, and I will show you exactly how I mix this to a progressive metal format. Okay, so the section that we're looking at here is from one of our songs called Inship. And this song is the first track off of our album, Ship Me to Heaven. We're looking at one of the sections here in the chorus where it gives all of the instruments some pretty good life. So this is what it sounds like all together with the guitars, the bass, the drums, and both the screaming and lead vocals here. So. Okay, so you can tell there's a lot of good happening. Pretty much a little bit more on the low end. You know, you hear a bit more bass from this, but everything's heard very nicely. And one of the things that I love about this is just the way that the bass guitar is mixed. So I'm gonna start with the bass guitar here. Our bassist Jack used the Kiesel bass. It's a 5-string Kiesel, I believe, and I can't remember exactly what the model was, but we just used his bass to directly plug into the audio interface. The audio interface I'm using is the SSL 2 Plus USB audio interface from Solid State Logic. It's a very nice interface, definitely recommend it. And this also has the ability to use 2 different headsets. So if you and a buddy are jamming and you're working with that interface, you can most certainly hear it without having to worry about background noise or anything like that. So it's very nice to have. Now, as for the bass guitar, what I did with this is I started with the one track that he recorded on, and I duplicated that track to create both a low and a high end distortion to this mix. Now the low end has the SVT Suite, which is an MPEG plugin here, and it's got some pretty decent gain. We don't want too much gain because otherwise that would cause a bit of bleed and buffering and whatnot. You hear mostly the low end with this, and that comes along with a Pro EQ, which is mainly targeting the areas of the low end while getting rid of some of these humming areas here. And then you also have a compressor. This is just the stock compressor plugin from Studio One, and I'm using Studio One 6 to use as my DAW program here. And I also have another Pro EQ. This is mainly because sometimes when things are compressed, you know, there's things that can stick out after the fact, and this was just to reduce some of that buzz that came through. Then we also have a red light distortion. This is a distortion plugin through Studio One, which is in every Studio One 6 and 7 program. Now, correct me if I'm wrong because I do not have Studio One 7, but I would think it is there. But this distortion does have a pretty good amount of drive, and it gives a nice, good low-end feel for that. And then I just top it off with some saturation. This is the BB Tubes saturation plugin, and this comes from Waves. So the Waves has done a really good job with plugins, and I've loved using their plugins for the kind of price that they give on it. They can really do a good job. And that low end is topped off with some high end distortion on another end here. This is mainly targeting the mids, and it's mainly to get more of the finger plucking that happens on the mid section here. And this EQ is getting rid of a lot of that hum noise that can really stick out and be a problem in the mix. So that's what this EQ here is for. And then we have right after that is another amplifier, which is kind of the same thing as the other Ampeg on the low end, except this is targeting more of the high and mid frequencies, and there's still just as much gain as there was on the other one. And the effects with this, we have an overdrive and a compressor, pretty decent settings on them. And then we have a compressor, which is another stock, the same stock plugin that we used on the other low end distortion here. And then we have a C6 mono multi-band compression. This is mainly just to focus on those plugs and not really anything else to it. So the whole point is to get rid of the low end because we already have so much going on in that low end, and just focus very heavily on those plugs that happen. And then we top it off with the Devil Lock Deluxe here. This is a very, very crunchy plugin from Soundtoys. I absolutely love this thing, and it can give a lot of nice beef to the bass guitar here. So this can really work out for you mix for any kind of bass guitar you have. And the top off to that high end is some more saturation, more done on the beauty side for this one. So that is bass guitar, and this is exactly what the bass guitar sounds like. So you get the idea of that. Now the next part we're going to look at are the drum tracks to this song. This was a crap load of work, just to say the least. I'm just going to give a short representation of what our drummer Brett provides for this recording here. So we did a kick here. This kick that he used, I personally kind of muted because that would have interfered with the way the overheads would sound. So I just made my own sampler kick on the Studio One 6 program here. And we also have the snare. We have a top and bottom mic snare. And the other percussion instruments are two overhead mics here. We have a Mangini snare here that's being used, which is, it's basically like a tom and a snare at the same time, but it's just smaller. That's kind of the representation with this. And we also have 4 Octobon mics here. We also have the ride cymbal. I'm sorry, I was pointing to the ride cymbal, but yeah, that's okay. Yeah, we have 4 Octobon mics, a Mangini snare, a ride cymbal, overheads, and over to the left side here we have the hi-hat, the China cymbal, and 3 different toms here. We have a 13-inch tom, we have a 16-inch tom, and a gong drum. Now, the reason why we had the China cymbal be its own mic is because there are really heavy sections in these songs in the Ship Me to Heaven album where we kind of felt like it was necessary to mic up this specific cymbal, and we could get a really, really dynamic sound coming from that alone. And it worked out perfectly. When you hear this whole song, you'll hear the ending breakdown with that China cymbal really taking the full force of it. So that's one of the reasons why we had a China cymbal. But going back to what I did in processing, I'm going to start with the kick drum that was done through the program here. So we did some EQ. The SSL channel is definitely the way to go if you're mixing drums as far as any sort of drum programming works. This is definitely the one to look at. You can see that there's some high frequencies done at the 2 kilohertz range, and there's also a cut around the low mid frequency area, and some low frequencies to give a little more boost towards the 200 hertz end. That also is done with this Pro EQ that's added. This actually helped a ton when one of my buddies gave a recommendation to just give a little more oomph to the 150 hertz range. This really has the kick cut through the mix very nicely, because you need that low end in order for it to satisfy and work together with the bass guitar. That's mainly what this is for here. And there's also, just a slight cut around the high end, but you also have a high end boost here with this EQ setup here. And then that is also applied with some saturation, mainly for the beast end of this saturation, because it focuses a lot more on the low end. And then we have a compressor. This compressor is very nice, but it also can be very sensitive. The gain is set to 45, but when you normally put this plugin in, it starts off with the gain of 40. Once you increase this just by 1, it can really do a lot. But when you hear this kick, it can really compress a lot here. So that's kind of the purpose with making sure we have the right settings with these, and we don't want to tailor it too much because it could throw things off at that point. Then you also have the Soothe 2 plugin. This was something I was debating on for a while because I didn't know how likely I was going to use it. For the kick drum, it seemed to work pretty nicely. It's meant to give the same similar sound to your kick drum while removing the harsh frequencies, so you have a more thorough mix happening. This, I feel like, was just very helpful to have this here with the settings here, with the settings given. And then to add on to this whole thing, this was one of the main focuses of getting a really good boost on a low end spectrum. But what this does is it gives a little bit of an earthquakey kind of feeling. The submarine, what is it called? The submarine plugin gives that nice earthquakey feel to the bass, so that way you get a little more depth in that mix. That's what this is for, and it really helps out, but you also don't want to overdo it because that could really start clipping the mix at that point. So that's the kick drum. And then we go on to the snare, which has some pretty good top end to this snare, really cracks through, and the bottom end is mainly the focus on reverb. So there's some EQ settings to the top mic here, and then just adding some Pro EQ mainly on the 317 hertz area just to get a boost to round out that snare drum hit. And then we apply the same amount of compression done here. And the saturation, a little bit of the beauty on the saturation end. And then we go to the bottom snare mic, and that has some EQ, mainly on the high mid-frequency area here and cutting the low mid-frequency areas. And we also have a compressor, a little bit lower on the gain settings for this one. And same thing, we have saturation and the room reverb, which it's not meant to do a ton, but 2 seconds worth is definitely lengthy if you think about it. This room reverb is specifically the stock plugin from the Studio 1.6 program, but you can use any reverb really to get what you're looking for on that bottom snare mic. And that's mainly it for those. The other areas to this, they mainly focus on Pro EQ areas. Like the toms here, they're specifically set for getting that high boost of energy on specific areas, and that gong drum was a little bit low on the volume, so we kind of had to kick it up just in the close to 2K section here, but it does kick through nicely with that. And as far as the China mic goes, this was where we kind of just had to set everything as level as we could, but while also increasing just a little bit of that high mid frequency here. This is plenty loud when it is mic'd up by itself, so there didn't need to be much processing aside from putting this in and the compression, and the same thing goes for a majority of these other instruments here. So when you hear the drums, this is what they sound like. Alright, the next part we're going to look at are the rhythm guitars, and then I'll show you the lead guitars. I'm going to start with the rhythm guitars though, first off, and this starts with a wonderful, wonderful set of instruments and plugins that we used for this guitar. The instrument that I used was the Schecter C1 Classic. It is the red guitar that I own. I did recently get a new Schecter. I did get the blue, see-through blue Schecter Omen Elite, I believe it's called. And this thing is a beauty. I absolutely love this as well. But Schecters have been my go-to with guitars. And the plugin that we used, we did not use an actual like amplifier to plug this into. I just plugged this right into my audio interface, and from there I had this wonderful, wonderful neural DSP plugin called the Archetype Petrucci. This thing has been a game changer completely for studio recordings. I absolutely love this. I did set a good amount of gain on this, but it does push through and give me a nice bounce in that mix. So it does help out with having that there. And I also focus very heavily with working with the high-end treble while adding just a touch of that low-end bass, putting some more tightness to the amp so that way there's less to process later on, and the bite is enabled here as well. So this thing really does the job. I absolutely love this plugin, and congrats to Neural DSP for making such a thing. But that's normally what we start with. So when you hear the raw and the mixed versions of the guitars, the raw version is just going to be the Archetype Petrucci, and the mixed version that you hear is going to be everything that we processed afterwards here. So let's just get started with the processing. So I start with the Pro EQ, and all I did was I really just needed to cut the low end, and I was able to cut around close to 40 hertz, 38 hertz here. And I normally wouldn't touch the high shelf, but I felt like I was hearing a lot of unnecessary noises happening, so I just cut out a little bit of that by around 8.5K here. That much is cut out. And what I also did to keep it away from that warmth and disgusting non-existent sound, I wanted to increase the high end just by a little bit, and this cut right here is defining that this was just making a very weird devilish noise, and it could hurt a lot of people's ears with that. So I just did a bit of a cut with that right there, and increased the rest of the high shelf area here. So that's the EQ that I set with this. And then I worked with the absolutely necessary plugin for guitars. It's Soothe 2.0. You definitely need to get this plugin, mainly because there's so much harsh frequencies happening within this high-end area. So this was definitely necessary to cut out a lot of the harsh frequencies while keeping the same similar sound of the guitars in play. Now, there are videos out on YouTube that you can check out to see what it sounds like with and without the Soothe 2.0. Definitely consider looking into this. It will work for guitars. We don't really know how likely that works for other instruments, but I can guarantee that the guitars will need this. And then to top that off, once those are done and processed, I just add some saturation to it. The Waves BB Tubes plugin has definitely worked in my favor as far as saturation goes, but you just don't want to overdo it, because then you could leave a lot of distorted sounds that you don't need in your mix. Okay, so that's why I just have it at very minimal settings here. Maybe the beauty is okay to lift, but you don't want too much of the beast, just so you can get a nice and natural sound coming from this guitar. And then afterwards, I used the decapitator. I did top it off with just a little bit more saturation, because it still needed to have a high-end push, just to give a little more life to the guitars. So you don't need much from decapitator, but it's enough to make it sound really nice here. And then this is what it sounds like with and without. Those are the rhythm guitars. Now, I'm gonna also show you the solo guitars here from this solo section within the middle of the song right before the third chorus comes in. So the same thing applied with the plugin. I used the Archetype Petrucci specifically on the guitar tracks, and that is pushed over to a bus here to lead to the guitars. And the EQ settings are pretty much the same thing as what I did on the rhythm guitars, and so is the Soothe 2.0 sound. And I think with the saturation here, this is where it needed a bit more of the beast mode here, because it's going to focus very heavily on the high end. Since there isn't really much rhythm happening besides the bass guitar, it is good to utilize the beast mode here, but this is to your liking and however you want to work with this with the lead guitar. Now, to top all of this off, I added some reverb. I used the Manny Marroquin plugin from Waves, which is a really good plugin, but it can also be very aggressive if you put it to a maximum level. So you just want a little bit of this, and I just added a bit more on the high end with this reverb setting as well. And then after the reverb was when I applied the delay, and this delay is counting the quarter notes at the 125 beat per minute sections here. So this is what the lead guitar in the solo section sounds like by itself. And the last thing I'll show you is the clean guitars here. So this is This isn't used very often. It's mainly for this first section here. But I will show you that it is kind of the same thing, except with this Archetype Petrucci setting, this was more of a clean tone setting. So the gain is only going to be at a very minimal value, while it's also focusing very heavily on mid-range areas and adding a bit more treble here. And in the effects plugins for the Archetype Petrucci, there's also this chorus setting that I applied here. Didn't put too much to it because we were going to put more chorus pedal sounds in later on. And then that plugin of the Archetype Petrucci goes to a bus where I put the guitar clean bus here. That has the Pro EQ settings that are the same as what we did for the other two guitar parts, along with the same soothe settings here, except there's going to be more of a boost here because there's a lot of that low mid-frequency area that just decides to jump through for some reason. So this was not good to have just so we retain the same sound, but we remove the harshness from it. And then we apply more saturation on the beauty end here. And this is where we added the extra chorus here, only because it's nice to have the chorus pedal in the plugin, but when you mix in a little more chorus, it can actually create a nicer blend depending on your taste of guitar sounds. This is exactly what the clean guitars sound like in the verse here. Alright, and the last section. Everyone's been waiting for this. No, you haven't. I know you haven't been waiting for this. The vocals. I suck. No, I'm kidding. Anyways, the vocals are the most important part to this, but the thing about this is that you don't need all that much processing when you have this plugin. That is a huge game changer. The XVOX plugin is definitely hyped up. I love this thing to death because it applies so much compression even if you just applied a little bit. I personally put in a lot of compression so I wouldn't have to worry about compressing other things later on. I understand this is a little bit of a cheap way to do it, but this thing really does the job, and I love what it does to get me started with a really solid mix on vocals. So the compression here really helps, and it also has a de-esser in this section too, so that could work out very nicely. It has its own EQ, which I do like very much, but it is very sensitive once you increase the air amount. So try to be careful with this section when you work with it. And it also has its own reverb and delay sections, and you can scroll around through different types of plugins for this. Every one of these is amazing. The same thing applies for the EQ, the compression area, and dynamics can be rolled around as much as you want. But yeah, the reverb works very nicely and the delay works very nicely. And you also have the SFX area where you can widen your pitch as much as you want to. Like if your vocals seem very narrow and they're very focused on the center, they can definitely be widened out by utilizing this plugin here. And you also have settings where it could sound like a chorus, it can sound like an amplifier, even something on the telephone if you're looking for something more distorted. This can work out very nicely too. But this is a definite look for vocalists that are just starting off with mixes. This could really work out. And the thing to remember about the vocals along with the guitars that I did here, with the guitars I panned each end out with 2 recordings. I used hard pan left here and a hard pan right on the other one. That happened for all the guitars here. The same thing applied with vocals on the harmonies, but with the screams and the lead vocals, I actually did 3 takes, because sometimes what will happen is there'll be a section where the vocals are not always clear with just 1 take. So these 2 ends here are to kind of cushion the lead vocal and give it that nice presence. It doesn't have to be loud. It's at -16 dB here, but it does give a nice cushion to this end. And that's what could really help, is that cushion right there. It doesn't have to apply throughout the entire song. Like, for example, I just use the 1 lead vocal center here for the verse 1 section here. But once it goes to the pre-chorus and the chorus sections, that's when I applied these other 2 sections, these other 2 takes with it as well. The one thing that I will also add is the EQ here, because it was necessary to eliminate some low end, because you don't need that trashiness of the low end down there. That's mainly for the bass guitar and kick, so that's something that we can easily eliminate. And this frequency here was necessary because from other videos that I've seen, especially Joe Gilder, who has done a ton of Studio One DAW program videos on YouTube, he has been a huge help with this, especially this part right here with vocals. When you find a frequency that gives a very whistly sound, and it can be very annoying to deal with. So the intention of this was to lower this just enough so that way it eliminates that weird devilly sound in your mix, and it gives a very nice and progressive tone to your vocals. And that's really it as far as that goes. With the screams here, I believe this XVOX was set to have more of a chorus SFX instead of a pitch widener, and this was more focused on giving a little more air and some room for the S's to come into play. So there was a bit more comp when that happens, but it seemed to work very nicely. And there was also some saturation added to this as well. So when you hear this, this is what the vocals will sound like to you. This is time to embrace this battle we face, and this is time to embrace this battle we face. This is time to embrace this battle we face. Okay, so you see how all of the instruments were properly mixed, at least in my opinion. Of course, everyone else may have different opinions on the mix and how they want to listen to it. But one of the things I wanted to add before I go to the conclusion is just the post-production that was here and the 2 plugins that I used here, right? So the first one that I used is the S1 Imager Stereo, which is here. And what this does is it widens the overall sound of the mix. Now, I try to be very careful with this, because what ends up happening sometimes is you can widen this out so that way the guitars are really, really present in the mix. But the further you go up with widening these guitars, the less you'll hear other instruments. And that's why I decided to be very careful with this and just hit it at 1.5 and not any further. I can give you some examples as I start playing this right now. So that is with the mix that I used at that level. Now let's say if I wanted to raise the bar here and make this wider, now watch what happens. Doesn't sound great because all of a sudden the other instruments are squashed. Now, you could say, okay, maybe you could raise it a little bit and it wouldn't be an issue. Maybe that may be the case, but I also care about what my other band members think. And we did agree that this was just enough, so that way every instrument could be heard very nicely in the mix. And then the other plugin that I used in order to finalize the master is Flatline 2. And this plugin is amazing. I absolutely love the hybrid mode to this, and there are some really cool tutorial videos on how this was done, but I just set the output to 0.3 so that way it can be used for CDs and streaming services without having to deal with clipping issues. And the other thing that we keep in mind is making sure we have a threshold so that way we know that it's not going to affect anything if we bring it down further than that. So 8.5 I felt like that was the right threshold for this, and the ceiling being 0.3, and this is exactly what we get from it. Now, I understand that there is some gain reduction, so it does squash a slight amount of instrumentation being done here, but it's not as terrible as you would think. It actually does try to smoothen out the instruments as best as possible, so that way you don't have to worry so much about one instrument exceeding the other. So that is how we managed to get a really good sound overall here. So that, my friends, is exactly how I process the whole mixing to this Inship single that goes towards our full album, Ship Me to Heaven. You can feel free to check out the songs through the link in the description below here. Now, keep in mind that just because I mixed it this way doesn't mean that you have to do literally everything that I did. But I hope this is a good guidance to you, and if you have your own ideas on how you mix your progressive metal music, feel free to leave a comment down below and let's talk about it. You know, I love to hear all your opinions and takes on this, but of course everyone is going to have their own way of doing this. But with that being said, I hope this helps you out, and take care and good luck with the rest of your music.